Thank y'all for joining us for this final session of the winter webinar training series for Corteva Range and Pasture. Looking forward to wrapping it up and actually getting out in the field and put to practice what we've been talking about. So before we get started, I'd like to open it up for some introductions. So joining us, we've got Tanner and Abe and myself. If they'll go ahead and introduce themselves, and we'll get started. So Tanner, if you want to open it up.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Ben. So, yeah, I'm Tanner Smith. I am the pasture specialist for the Upper Midwest. Cover kind of anything eastern Missouri rivers of the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin. Been doing this role for just a little over 3 years. Been with Dow Chemical, Dow AgriScience, Corteva, starting back in like 2017. Love what I do. Love working with folks out in the field. That's my email address. Please jot that down. Reach out to me if you got any questions throughout the season. And yeah, very grateful for you guys being on the call today.
Hey, good morning, guys. My name is Abe Smith. I'm the territory representative or territory manager for Eastern Nebraska, which goes all the way over to what we consider Western Nebraska most days, from McCook all the way over to the Mississippi River in Iowa, and work with customers across that region, both aerial and ground and retail, and work in the range and pasture as well as our land management business in Nebraska. Been with Corteva for this is my 28th season, and have enjoyed this range and pasture business very much, and have a lot of knowledge we can share. And it's that time of year where we get lots of questions, and it's always fun to see what comes across the phone call when people have different questions, and trying to make recommendations for customers.
Yeah, and I'm Spin Oliver, so I'm working under Tanner Smith as an associate territory manager, primarily focusing on Minnesota and Wisconsin, based out of southern Minnesota. And I'm a transplant up there, graduated from the University of Georgia, and kind of figuring out Upper Midwest a little bit. But I've loved it and enjoying it, and looking forward to this first spring I've had with Corteva. Started back in June, so looking forward to it. So before we get started with content, I wanted to touch on how we can make sure we address your questions. There's a Q&A tool that you'll see on the top of your screen. So if we cover something you have a question on, feel free to use that tool, type your question in there. We'll either address it live in front of everyone or individually, either at the moment or at the end during our Q&A session. So getting into kind of what to expect for the next 45 minutes. We're going to kind of dive into what's new from Corteva, what you may see this year that you haven't seen in years past, some of our best practices and timing and products for some local weeds that you may have issues with, some of the details of haying and manure restrictions, as well as brush control, and kind of getting into how we can grow pasture business. And at the very end, we'll talk about how we're going to give away the Arctic cooler. So we'll dive into that. But first off, let's talk about what's new from Corteva. And, some of these brands you may be familiar with and may have seen in years past, but there definitely are some new ways we can differentiate. And we'll dive into some of these brands and how that would look at your location. So the first one to talk about is DuraCore. So we're coming into the 5th season with DuraCore. And this product is essentially what you may know as your residual broadleaf pasture control. So traditionally, this would be compared to a Graze on Next acre, is what DuraCore would go out on. And foundationally, what DuraCore is going to do is it's going to step into the next generation of formulations for residual pasture control. It's got the newest active ingredient in the range and pasture market in almost 15 years, called Rinskor Active. And what that is going to do is it's going to replace the 2,4-D amine that's in Graze on Next. And when you pull out that 2,4-D amine in Graze on Next and replace it with Rinskor Active, it's going to broaden that weed spectrum with over 140 species controlled, which is 40 more than Graze on Next, as well as reduce the risk profile and improve your confidence with spraying applications. So it has no volatility, low odor. It also drives down that use rate. So Duracore goes all the way up to 20 ounces to the acre, whereas Grazon Next goes all the way up to 34. So like I said, stepping into the next generation when it comes to formulations for your pasture products. And Duracore is going to perform especially well on some of the key weeds in this geography. So when you look at locust, hemlock, wild carrot, wild parsnip, multiflora rose, it has improved activity on a lot of those species that have been difficult to control in the past. It tank mixes very well with other herbicides. So in terms of having a product that can go on broad use sites in your pasture program, it's a great foundation to build off of for a wide variety of uses. And it's also weed and feed ready, which we'll dive into here in a second. But it's available through Ultigraze as a dry fertilizer impregnation, as well as it mixes well with UAN. So really improving versatility with Duracore and stepping into the next generation with this product. So going from there, this opens us up to our first poll question, which I'll get opened up. Oh, let's see. Y'all see that poll question?
Yep.
Awesome. So does your location sell pasture fertility, talking farmer applied and or custom applied pasture fertilizer? So kind of two options there. Select one or the other or both. So, good deal. Last one piling in. So go ahead and end this one. We can share it if y'all can see the results. So you got about 42% saying you have operation or you sell both farmer and custom applied. 31 saying mainly farmer applied. So ultimately, Ultigraze can fill a wide variety of operational systems. But we'll dive into kind of what that looks like, and it's great to kind of get an idea of what y'all are seeing on the ground. So let's see. So getting into Ultigraze, Ultigraze is not a product you would sell on the shelf. It's not something that you would stock. It's a service you provide. And what it is it is dry fertilizer impregnated with Duracore that's going to give you pasture fertility and weed control all in one pass, or one pass better grass. And ultimately, what that's going to do is it's going to improve efficiency, being able to get across the field one time and improve pasture fertility, as well as not fertilize those undesirable weed species that we don't want thriving any more than they already are by having that weed control in there. One avenue that we really want to make sure we ensure isn't a concern for your operation is obviously we know that broadleaf herbicides, if they're not managed correctly in an operation that does row crop and soybeans, things like that, cross contamination is a serious concern, and we want to make sure that we address that. And one way we're able to do that, and folks have been creative in how we're able to handle this concern, is to use tender trucks as a mixing avenue for Ultigraze to keep that herbicide contained into one spot, so you're not having to worry about dirtying up a full-size blender. You can mix Ultigraze and Duracore within the auger of a tender truck to keep that herbicide where it is within the auger and not having to clean out blenders or anything like that. So definitely a way we can get creative and try to differentiate your market and open up a whole new market is ideally what we would hope to do. We'd hope you sell more fertilizer and sell more herbicide and promote a full scale, full system approach for pasture management for your customers. As you can see in this video right here, you'll see the fertilizers start to turn blue. So we always recommend some sort of dye or coloration to make sure your folks know the fertilizer that's blue doesn't need to go out on row crop, things like that. Just making sure that off-target use is reduced as much as possible. But yeah, so UltiGraze is a way we want to hopefully help you expand your market and grow into areas that you maybe haven't in the past. We hope that UltiGraze is going to give you that branded service to go the extra mile for your customers and provide a broad approach for how they manage pastures. And kind of stepping into the next product we want to kind of talk about that's new from Corteva. And it's pending EPA approval, but it's a product called Proclova. And essentially it is a broad spectrum herbicide that's going to be safe on white clover and annual Lespedeza. So what this is going to do, typically in the past, you've had to make a decision as to whether or not you want weed control or beneficial forbs. Because no treatment in the past has been able to differentiate. And what Proclova is going to do is it's going to bridge that gap. So it's going to bring in Rinskor Active that we had talked about with Duracor, as well as a low rate of 2,4-D, and that's going to be safe on your white clover. So folks that are grazing livestock on white clover, even have wildlife food plots that are wanting to extend the life of those food plots, Proclova is going to give them an opportunity to control those difficult weeds, thistle, a lot of your carrot species, things like that. It's going to give them control over those non-desirable broadleaves, but keeping the white clover. And as you can see, the list right there: ragweed, gumweed, wild carrot, biennial thistles, things like that. It's going to give you that same broadleaf control, just without damaging your beneficial forbs. But that one's pending EPA approval, so hopefully we'll see that one here in the near future. But as of right now, it's still in the pipeline. But with that, I'll turn it over to Abe to dive into Grazon PD3.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Grazon PD3 is kind of a new spin on an old concept. You may have heard of Grazon P plus D. Many of you have used that product successfully over the 30 plus years that it's been in existence. And here in the last couple of years, we had a product called Grassland L. Grassland L was the forerunner of PD3 specifically. But what PD3 offers that's differentiated from P plus D is it utilizes our 2,4-D choline technology that we are using in our enlist crops. It gives us a 2,4-D that is a non-volatile form, a much lower odor form of 2,4-D. And when put together with the Tordon product, we have a more condensed or concentrated product that is still tried and true and proven. And Pickle products have been a really well accepted option for many different weeds, and even still today are still really good weed options for things like leafy spurge. And so we have reduced risk, high load formulation of P plus D with no volatility, no odor, and lower application rates. It's 62.5% of the previous rate, or roughly 2/3. So if you've used 3 pints in the past, you use 30 ounces, or roughly 2.5 pints of 2.5 pints of Grazon PD3. And it still works very well on a variety of tough to control weeds. Mentioned leafy spurge, milkweed. The thistle complex is really well defined in that. Grazon PD3 continues to be, though, a restricted use product because of the picoram, and may not be a better product than what you're utilizing in solutions today, where you're using a Duracor or a Grazon Next, because of some of the issues that might present to you. So Grazon PD3 is a good option. It's a new option from us. First year we've had it under this trade name. And I think if you've been using P plus D, you should really investigate using PD3, because I think we've found it to be a good solution, not only for retailers in terms of reducing volume that's needed, but for customers as well, because it's giving them a better experience overall. Next slide. Let's talk about some of the timings and recommendations we have, some best practices for your local weeds that we work with. Let's start with this though. When's the best time to spray pastures, or what are you most likely to recommend? So Spen will trigger the poll question here. We'll give you a chance to respond. We've got about 35 people online here. And man, I appreciate, we've had very good attendance for our spring webinars here, and just want to say thank you for making the time to do this. It is a pleasure to have 35 people to present to, just because it makes things a little bit more lively, and we do get some different questions. So if you do have questions, don't be afraid to put a question in the Q&A while you have a chance here. So we've given you about 30 seconds. We've got 22 out of 35. The last 13 people, don't be afraid. You can go ahead and mash that button. You can pick which one you want to pick here. Some of you may be running two screens at the same time. It's hard to tell sometimes. All right, 24 out of 35. Give you a couple more seconds and we'll close this one. I know this is a hard question for some of you. It's a question that we get asked quite a bit. All right, Spen, let's go ahead and close that. Go ahead and share that. And I find it interesting that we have a split between spring and fall. When is the best time to spray? Spring, fall, or just spray it? Well, you guys are a divided audience, which is actually indicative of how our customers overall are represented. And anymore, the longer I go in this business, the more I recognize that just spray it is a really real option. It's a significant option for many customers because they're adjusting those timeframes to what works best for them. And I would much rather them spray something and make some improvements in their pasture rather than not spray it. But there are definite times for spring or fall that may actually be better overall. All right, let's go ahead, and I'm going to switch here to my phone because I'm starting to get notices on my, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and there we go. So when's the best time to spray? It's going to vary depending on what your practices dictate. Although we do have some pretty clear positions for spring. What things are we going to have that are effective for spring overall? And where are we going to be effective? We're going to be spraying this in the spring or summer annuals or winter annuals. Things like henbit, cocklebur, vetch, kochia, snow on the mountain. These are actually times where these weeds can be sprayed, and you don't have that option in the fall. So things like biennials, musk thistle, bull thistles, the whole thistle complex, very common to have those sprayed there, as well as your perennials. We do get things like ironweed as well as Canada thistle that we do want to see treated on a regular basis in the spring, and is most advantageous for those situations. Rates, I'm having some difficulty here, Spen. Let's see if this can help me. Rates of products that we're recommending: Duracor at 16 to 20 ounces. If your 16 is our general recommendation for the variety of weeds that we generally treat. But if you're getting into some of the perennial weeds, we're going to push you up to that 20-ounce rate range. And with any of the weed complex, we want to be using a non-ionic surfactant. We'll talk about that some more here in a little bit. But graze on next rates are going to run from 28 to 34 ounces. And very commonly, we feel like we do a lot of good in this May through June timeframe. I've got folks starting here in Nebraska, although we are going to table spraying for this weekend with some of the cold temperatures that are coming. We know are inbound, where we're going to be in the 30s, if not below 30s, for a period of time here this week. If we do have this cold weather, sometimes we get what can equate to what you may recognize as a bad burn down treatment. And so we sometimes lose efficacy when we have these cold temperatures. These plants shut down metabolically. They don't do a whole lot. So it may be well advised to go ahead and make sure that you
Let the temps come back up for a couple days, get past this cold spell, and let things get back to normal. Go to the next slide, Sven. For fall application, we are not going to be treating annual weeds. Annual weeds have already gone to flower, they've gone to seed. You're not going to kill them any deader than they are at this point in time. And so treating annual weeds becomes a bit of a farce. There may be some annuals that you might be able to treat that might be coming. Realistically, they're going to die in a freeze anyway, and you will not be any better off on annuals. But fall is where you can actually gain some very significant improvements on biennials and perennials. So we go back to the thistle complex, we look at common mullein, things like absinthe wormwood or the carrot family of species. So that includes wild carrot and parsnip, poison hemlock. So we can do some real good there. And then you get into the perennial family, things around knapweed, Canada thistle, leafy spurge might be something we would treat in the fall as well. Maybe not with these suggested treatments here, but leafy spurge is also a perennial weed that would benefit from a fall treatment. Generally speaking, rates we're looking at in the fall, Duracor 18 to 20 ounces, along with an NIS, and Grazon Next in that 30 to 34 ounce range with an NIS as well. Simple NIS quart per 100, and you can go with something more significant from there if you want to. Go ahead, Sven. So for general recommendations for some targeted weeds, for some local weeds, and again, if you have any specific weed recommendations you'd like us to weigh in on, go ahead and put those in the Q&A and we can sure address those. But for thistle, Canada thistle, 16 to 20, 18 to 20 ounces of Duracor, depending on your window of spraying. There are better times, and I appreciate the guy who wants to just go out there and spray it. We know that there are two good windows to spray, and right before as those thistles are bolting and going to flower. But once you go from flower all the way till you have rosette regrowth in the fall, you may have folks come to you and want to spray in a July or an early August before those rosettes are really up and going. You're not doing yourself any favors. You may be choosing a suboptimal time frame to do those things. So you may not get the best results. And producers need to understand that just by spraying doesn't mean you'll always get the optimal results. By abiding some of these recommendations, we hope that give them optimal results and give them the best choice of all. So for these timings. What's better, spring or fall? We do see commonly in a lot of university trials that fall does see on perennial weeds like thistle, a 5% improvement in weed control. 5%, though, at a university level is nothing that I would change my program radically for. So it comes down to this, is what works best for your producer and when is the more convenient time frame for them to do it. And I think for many producers, the best bang for the buck in most cases is going to be in a spring sort of time frame when we can control all the weeds that we have, whether they're perennials, annuals, or biennials. You get the best bang for your buck out of a spring application in May into early June. For leafy spurge, we've got 60 to 80 ounces of Grazon PD3 in both spring and fall. Generally speaking, I'm at a little bit less than, I'm at that 40 to 60 ounce rate in Nebraska. The more juice, the better, the more bang for the buck that you get out of those treatments. But we do tend to see some brome response with Grazon PD3 at higher rates. So that tempers some of my rate recommendation in Nebraska. And for wild parsnip, which is a horrendous weed in Iowa and coming further west to you every day, Duracor has been lights out on wild parsnip and poison hemlock both, that are weeds that cause a lot of issues. So would not hesitate to recommend 16 to 20 ounces of Duracor for those both spring. The fall, we tend to move into that 18 to 20 ounce range. So a couple of common questions that we get. Can I spray Duracor or Tordon around trees? And the answer is, well, it depends. You can spray carefully. If you stay out of the drip line of trees, you can usually do a very good job and maintain safety to that. Duracor is safer on more trees than what a Tordon may be. except for leguminous trees like locusts or carragana. Redbuds are also on that list that would limit our utility of milestone round trees. If you have concerns, stay back, stay away from them, and stay very clear of the drip line. Feel free to contact us for more specific recommendations, or if you know the species that you're trying to work around, work with. And then what adjuvant should I use? Very commonly, adjuvants are almost always going to be a benefit to your producers. The number one thing that you can do for that over-the-counter customer is when you send them out the door with a jug of Duracor or a jug of Grazon Next, send them home with a jug of NIS, your favorite NIS or your adjuvant. Many are not using an adjuvant at all in their pastures, and it shows. And so the addition of a surfactant to help improve the leaf spread on some of these herbicides will really improve their efficacy overall. And in droughty, dry, stressed conditions, surfactants can really redeem the day. Just saw the drought map update for Iowa. Iowa is all in brown, as is fitting for a drought. The half of Nebraska is in yellow and brown as well. So surfactants can really improve performance of herbicide overall, not only in crops, but also in pasture.
Thank you, Abe. Well, yeah, and kind of going off that first question, if you'll look in the chat box, I dropped a link to a Showpad collection of kind of documents there. So feel free to save that to your desktop, download those files. They're for your reference, and definitely feel free to lean on those when you get some of the questions. There's some pretty helpful recommendation sheets there for this area. But next, we want to dive into a little bit of grazing, haying, and manure restrictions. So one of the reasons that we're able to provide a weed control product that works so well is that they have a strong residual profile, and that's what's going to give you the long-term control. But what that also requires from us is a little bit of stewardship and understanding where that residual goes after we apply. So there are some restrictions that we can walk through really quickly. So first, kind of defining a grazing restriction is it's any special instructions pertaining to applying the herbicide in areas currently grazed by livestock. So that means there are livestock currently in the field at the time of application. You find this information on the label. But one important distinction the label makes is the difference between lactating livestock and other livestock. And what lactating livestock or lactating dairy specifically is what these restrictions pertain to, is a dairy cow that is being milked for consumption. This would not apply to cow-calf operations with a mama cow nursing a calf. That would not pertain to them. So that distinction is very important when it comes to understanding what these restrictions look like. So if you start on the left side of that column, the products with no restrictions are Duracor, Grazon Next, Remedy Ultra, and Proclova is anticipated to not have a grazing restriction. And the products that do have restrictions are Grazon PD3, Remedy Crossbow, Tordon 22K, and Grazon P plus D. So understand there that they are making the distinction between lactating dairy animals, and they each have an associated time that grazing can happen after application. So with Grazon PD3, it's 7 days. Tordon is 14 days after application. P plus D is 7 days. So just being aware that whatever circumstance the product's being used in, understanding what it's going to be used for, and making sure we're staying within the label there. The next point I want to touch on is haying and manure restrictions. So kind of to define those is any special instructions regarding harvesting, movement, or use of herbicide-treated hay and manure. And in order to kind of simplify the portfolio that can seem pretty confusing, is we try and break the products down into two groups or two families. The first being amino pyrrolid products, or you may know Milestone. And those products are Duracor, Grazon Next, Chaparral, and of course Milestone. And these are your aminopyrrolid products. And the other family is picloram or tordon. And this would be Grazon PD3, Grazon P plus D, and Tordon 22K. So both of these products have residual activity, and that's going to be something we want to make sure we're aware of when it comes to managing haying and manure restrictions with these two families. So as an example, we're going to look at the label restrictions and what it looks like and how we can best manage these restrictions and making sure that we're being good stewards of the product. So if there's one number we can remember when it comes to our product's residual activity is 18 months. From the time of application, you start a timer till 18 months post-application. And that's the amount of time it takes for that residual activity to no longer be active at the site of application. But what that means is the residual is going to will persist in all plant matter, livestock manure that are grazing that plant matter, as well as the soil of the treated pasture. So being aware of any manure we use from the livestock that are treating that pasture, as well as hay harvested off that pasture. So according to the label, and there are some restrictions that we'll get in, or exceptions we'll get into here in a second, but you cannot harvest hay off of a Duracore, in this case treated pasture, for 18 months post application to be sold off farm. Now, like we had mentioned about that clock, if you were to harvest hay off of the farm, you could store it for a period of 18 months post application to allow that residual to break down. But as long as it's 18 months within application timeframes, there will still be residual activity. The same applies for manure. If you were to collect manure from livestock that have been grazing a treated pasture, that manure will contain residual activity for 18 months after the application date. Now, if your producer has an operation where it requires collection of manure and they're wanting strong weed control, there's an opportunity for them to remove the cattle from that treated pasture for a period of 3 days and then to begin collecting manure. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the livestock to clear the treated feed from their rumen and from their digestive tract. It's going to give them the opportunity to get that out over the period of 3 days, and then their manure will be clear of residual activity from the herbicide. And all this is an example from the Duracore label, but you can see that little picture on the right kind of spells it out. But making sure we're good stewards of the products that we're using, and ensuring that our customers are aware of the long-term effects of what they use. And I know we mentioned a little bit about the supplemental labeling. So some of these revisions, so I mentioned the hay intended for off the farm sale, as well as grass harvested for silage, haylage, baleage, green chop, intended for farm or ranch. So North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska are the 3 states within this geography that are going to have that supplemental labeling. And there's also additional labeling for use on rights of way and utility lines that North and South Dakota have that addition as well. So being aware of where your customer is and making sure that they're up to date on the latest opportunities they have to make the most of the product that they're using there. Oh, and one other point I forgot to mention, going back here, we talked about the 18 months. That same figure applies for plant back when it comes to broadleaf crops. So if you apply on CRP that's hoping to come out within the next year, understanding that from that time of application, 18 months to even 2 years, we would recommend being the plant back interval for a broadleaf crop and 12 months for a grain crop. So kind of gauging that expectation with customers as well before we do that. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Abe for some brush control.
You bet. Brush control tends to get a lot of attention early in the season with people hopefully planning treatments for later in the summer. Right now, it's not a good time for brush control because we don't have enough leaves on them. But let's talk about what we do have for options available. Oftentimes, I get questions where folks want to say, I want to treat once and I want all the trees to be gone for all of like $20. And there's no silver bullet for most of these applications. And that's tough for people to understand or tough to appreciate. But we can get pretty granular in our definitions and recommendations. It's highly prescriptive. It's species specific, and it changes based on the timing and some other factors. But we've got a lot of resources available to you, and we've got a lot of experience as well. So we're going to talk about primarily the method application, and then how to access some of our brush control tools. So we'll talk about foliar versus basal brush versus cut stump. And these illustrations are very, very helpful. Foliar, where we're treating just the leaf surface of brush, we wanted those applications to be made while the plant is actively growing during green up. We can cover large acreage, usually broadcast is the way that this would happen. Some kind of times we do hand wand applications with a UTV or an ATV, but the reality is coverage is really critical and the timing is pretty narrow when we can do that. July and August are kind of the two peak months for doing that. July being the preferred time when we have the most leaf surface available. And then August and June secondarily. But again, sometimes timing goes back to when is convenient, when people have the ability to make those applications. We also have basal bark, which basal bark is a treatment that I love because it utilizes some of the structure from a chemical aspect. It takes advantage of trichopyr ester, which is Remedy versus Remedy Ultra, and or Remedy Ultra. We use it in a 1-to-3 ratio with diesel fuel or your basal oil of choice. And it's a chemical girdling. It is actually putting a herbicide onto the cambium layer of that plant, the bark of that plant, which restricts the flow of nutrients and respiration, and it kills off the outer part of that tree, and by proxy kills off the whole piece of brush. The wonderful thing about basal bark is it can be done pretty much any time of year that you don't have standing snow, where you don't have the ground frozen. Can be very, very effective. Usually this is more effective on smaller trees, things that are 6 inches in diameter or less, and you can be surgical with them. You can selectively kill off trees in a stand, and Remedy does not have a lot of soil residual, so you're not going to necessarily have root uptake of adjacent trees and harm adjacent trees, which I find to be a real benefit. They'll also have cut stump treatments for folks that are wanting to go in there with a chainsaw and remove larger trees. We can still and oftentimes would recommend that you would take a treatment of Tordon RTU or a high percentage of similar to the basal bark sort of treatment with Remedy, and to spray not only the cut stump area, but any bark area above the surface or any treated roots. This can be done during dormancy as well, as long as there's no standing snow, and it is an IPT or an individual plant treatment. One other note I do want to make on brush is Remedy versus Remedy Ultra. There's been some confusion about Remedy versus Remedy Ultra. Why can't I find Remedy Ultra any longer? Due to some supply chain issues back during the 2020 and 2021 years, we strategically made a choice to move much of our production to an older formulation of Remedy Ultra, which I find to be just fine. There's no difference in pricing, there's no difference in programs, and more importantly to your customers, no different in rates. So a quart of Remedy Ultra is a quart of Remedy. We use them interchangeably. You can mix them together without any issues. But primarily came back to us solving an issue we were having, sourcing inerts on a very consistent basis. Making that change allows us to be very responsive and continue to make products in a timely fashion for the Remedy market overall. So how do you grow your pasture business? And some of the things that we want to focus on with you as retailers, Why should we help leverage our pasture acres? Guys, there's a lot of pasture that goes untreated, and there are many producers that are either scared to ask or don't want to ask how to treat their pastures. They see this as a very, here's a problem, here's a weed, I want to kill the weed and go on. And producers don't necessarily understand that there's a great value here to improve the farm forage that they have, to improve the pastures that they have. This isn't about just killing weeds. This is about actually improving their overall pastures and 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 making significant upgrades in terms of their forage production. We do know from years and years of working in this business, if we take a pound of weeds out, we're probably going to replace it with a pound or more of grass. We've seen that consistently. And by reducing the amount of weeds out there, we're promoting herd health, you're improving your feed quality, and you're seeing increased yield oftentimes. And this kind of gives you a way to differentiate yourself, perhaps from some other producer or other retailers in the area, by demonstrating some expertise in this area, by offering something unique for those of you that may be interested in introducing Ultigraze as a service to your customers. Offering impregnated fertilizer would be a really unique way. And those sort of treatments have not spread all over Iowa and the Dakotas and Nebraska yet. For some reasons, it's been a slower developing market here, but it's also been tough to break through. And once we see customers, though, break through with their customer base, we've seen those acreage totals increase, and it often offers a great way for you to improve the margins, even on some fertilizer that goes out on pasture that you may not quite. You can differentiate yourself on that pasture acre as well and improve your margins on that. So our range of pasture products are part of the True Choice offer. Not all of them, but several are. So Duracore, Chaparral, Graze On Next, Remedy, Pasture Guard are all part of that offer. And it's just a great way to utilize those balances late in the season and to help producers find some discounts as well, potentially.
Good deal. Well, now we'll kind of open it up for questions. That's kind of the end of the content. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And I'll kind of kick it off with one. Abe or Tanner, feel free to jump on this. But, when it comes to seeding grasses, we have weeds, wanting to control those, but we also want to get a new forage stand established. Do you want to seed grasses after you apply, or do you want to apply first and then seed grasses? What's the best practice there?
I tend to recommend commonly spraying first and then seeding. Many of our products have a 30 to 45 day sort of plant back option with them. Whereas if you seed first, you're at least 60, if not 90 days out, because to spray young grass seedlings, you want to have at least secondary roots, which puts you probably 45 days out. And even then, you're going to use sublethal rates oftentimes on some of these weeds because you don't want to harm those seedling grasses early in their development. Your grass seed is only as good as you start out with, and if you make a heavy herbicide application in that young window, you're going to impact that, and the money that you spent on the seeding is kind of gone down the drain. So I would lean towards spraying first and then seeding. Oftentimes you guys are asked to come clean up something after a producer has already seeded. I had a couple questions yesterday to that effect. How do I fix this problem? And the answer is you can't. There's not necessarily an easy button here. So mechanical mowing can offer a good means to solve some of those weed issues early in the season until those grasses can accept a herbicide. But even throughout the first year, you want to take it easy on many of these grass seedlings.
Awesome. Well, good deal. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Do y'all have anything else you want to add or touch on before we get out? I know we got a minute or so left, but if not, we'll give some warning back. And
well, the season is right around the corner. If make sure that you are checking your volumes, your inventories, and make sure you have some things on hand. Don't let the barn get too dry. I think we're going to have good production all throughout the season, but nothing hurts worse than being in a position where you see the bottom of the pile and you know more customers are going to be coming in. So getting stuff logistically around takes time. And so make sure you're thinking through those things ahead of time, not only on your crop protection products, but also on your range and pasture.
Yeah, and I'd also add to that point too. I mean, if there's a specific pack size that you know you want or your customers are coming in, sometimes there can be, in season as everyone's busting, an individual pack size might have a regional outage. So just be aware of that as well as if there's something critical to your program. Usually signaling that earlier than later is always a good call so we can address any logistical changes. So, but yeah, we're planning for a lot of production this year. Looks like all signal demands are pretty high, and we're excited to keep up with it. So let us know what questions you guys have. Again, Spen put a link in the chat that has several really good resources, things like a one-stop shop for recommendations, best practices, a little bit further detail on planting grass seed. If there's something missing from there, certainly reach out to us. We're specialists in these roles. We don't do really any row crop stuff. You guys have to do everything. Feel free to reach out to us. Use us as a tool to be that agronomist to your customer that you want to be. So again, thank you for being on the call and joining us this morning, and hope you guys have a good rest of the week.
Take care, guys.
Yep. Thank y'all. And there'll be look out for an email next week. I will announce the winner of the cooler. But yeah, feel free, snap pictures of those contacts. Thank y'all for joining us, and wish y'all a good spring.